This day has come. After suffering in the skin of a crusader, a legionary, and a samurai, we are going to the place everyone has dreamed of visiting. Of course, Sparta, the harshest state in history. Today we're going to grow some abs and go under the command of King Leonidas to fight the Persians and find out what the feat of the 300 Spartans really was. Unfortunately, real life is very different from what was shown in movies and games. But that's what our channel is for, isn't it? So vote if you want to go to Sparta in the comments and get ready, it will be very brutal. Let's start with the historical background. The name of the state of Sparta itself is not too correct and came to be thanks to the Romans. Take a look at any Spartan warrior's shield. There you can clearly see the letter L in Greek sounding like lambda. The reason is simple. The Spartans did not call themselves Spartans. They were called Lacedaemon after the city of Lacedaemon, the accent of which is erroneously carried to the last syllable even by experienced historians. It was later that the city was more often called Sparta, hence the modern name. The second prejudice is the positioning of Sparta as a closed city. No, my friends, Sparta is a state that existed for almost 1,000 years, from the 11th to the 1st century BC. At that time, there were many states in Greece, and our Sparta was located in the south of the Peloponnese Peninsula, in the area called Laconia. By the way, the term laconic speech came from there, because people of Sparta were not very talkative. Somewhere there, our Spartan Basil was born. Don't be surprised, the name Basil is Greek. And in fact, it is very proud, because it literally means king. It is somewhere around 480 BC. Sparta is as strong as ever. The state extends its influence over almost the entire Peloponnesian Peninsula. Nearby is the Athenian power, which our state does not like. But the main problem is not Athens. In the east, there is a huge empire of the Achaemenids, known in common parlance as the Persians. They do not know the sorts of Greeks and are charged with one simple goal: to take over all Greek land. This is a serious problem, for one look at the map is enough to realize how much more resources, people, and banal unity the Persians have. Whereas Greece was broken up into mini-states which entered into an alliance only in the face of a threat, the Persians fought on a single front. Looking ahead, they lost. Why? Because for the Greeks, the art of war is sacred, and for the Spartans, it is life. Our Basil is a typical homoioi. That's how Spartan citizens with full rights were called. There were also common workers, mothaks. There were neodamodes, considered only half citizens. But the hardest fate awaited the helots, the poorest caste of Spartans, who were mostly peasants. They hovered somewhere between serfs and slaves, but the structure of Sparta was more complicated than that of similar states. So, for example, our Basil's family might have had a dozen helots with plots of land in their charge. On paper, they were serfs and obliged to give a fixed percentage of the harvest to Basil's family. The difference between Sparta and other states of the time is that the lord could not increase this percentage in any way. It was set by law. Basil was lucky to be a citizen of Sparta, because for one citizen there were 10 helots, who often staged a revolt. They were punished as severely as possible, and once a year the Spartan rulers even declared war on their own helots in order to slaughter the most violent and keep everyone in obedience. Yes, you are not wrong. The Spartans were actually declaring war on themselves. After all, we are talking about one of the most brutal states in history. Everything was subordinated to one goal: war. Basil, like other boys, left his family at the age of 7 for the barracks. There, the Spartan boys were lumped into groups and taught martial arts, sports, and even reading, which was unusual for those times. There was always an adult with the little ones, and the children walked exclusively without shoes and in the same clothes winter and summer. The food was a separate story. All the adolescents were fed with a special broth. Its name was melanus zomos, and it was pork boiled in blood mixed with vinegar. It was almost unreal to eat, and the children were starving. This was only encouraged by the state. In Sparta, there was a cult of simplicity and also a cult of strength, and no one stopped teenagers from stealing. The punishment was severe, but the thief who was not caught was even praised for his skills. Now let's talk about myths. The most popular one is that children unfit for service were thrown down a mountain. This story comes from the philosopher Plutarch, who in the 100th year of our era said that children who seemed suspicious to the council were throwing them off of Mount Taygetus into a pit. Allegedly, no one asked the parents and the case was forced. The trouble is that Greek historians like to embellish reality. In fact, everything was simpler. The practice of infanticide was widespread not only in Sparta, but also in other regions of Greece and Rome. But it applied to children who were very sick so that they would not suffer. And for moderately handicapped citizens, there was a whole class. They were called hypomeones. Yeah, they weren't exactly respected, but they weren't thrown off a mountain. and archaeologists have long ago examined all the canyons where children were allegedly thrown, and they did not find any remains there. Let's return to Basel. Children could wear clothes only from the age of 12, and before that time they were run naked. They slept in the barracks on straw mats, and on cold days many put nettles on the mats. It burned the body and kept the boys warm, allowing them to survive, so that at the age of 17 they could pass the final test to climb the Temple of Artemis. It was high up in the mountains, and the test consisted of the cruelest flogging. The boy had to endure a heap of whipping, which stopped only after the first blood, and if a Spartan broke off into a scream, the blows continued and only increased in intensity after the blood. Such is the final exam of a Spartan warrior. Our Basil is a real warrior and passed the exam perfectly, but the exam only gave him the right to leave the closed barracks and appear in public. At 17, Basil had just begun military service to the state. To understand all it's not easy, let's talk about wages. As we have already mentioned, even good food was considered a luxury in Sparta, so the phrase about the Spartan diet is not an empty sound. A month, Basil received a standard ration. That's 3.5 buckets of barley, 5.5 pounds of cheese, a kilo of dates, and about a gallon of wine. Compare that to a Roman legionary or a samurai from past clips, and you get a depressing picture. Also, Basil, like other Spartan warriors, was allocated several metal rods weighing 1.3 pounds each. But that is a separate story. In an effort to avoid luxury and inequality, the Spartan ruler Lycurgus came up with an interesting solution. For the accumulation of silver and gold, the death penalty was introduced, and the money in Sparta was these same iron rods. One weighed 625 grams, and to buy something worthy, they had to carry the money in harnesses. The idea was simple, for any large transaction became public. It is impossible to move so much money unnoticed, and if the transaction is public, one might be interested in it and find out where one got so much money. When a person from another country came to Sparta, he was confronted with the fact that he could not buy anything. The Spartans looked on the gold and silver coins with horror. Such a scheme cardinally killed corruption, robbery, and looting. What was the point of taking a bribe if you had to build a whole barn to hold the money, attracting attention? So Basil, in addition to a meager ration, got a few rods. With them you could buy 22 pounds of meat and survive, at the same time training in a murderous daily routine. After all, a Spartan warrior is worth a dozen others, and this principle had to be maintained. On the whole, the equipment of the warriors was well represented in the 300 Spartans movie. Our Basil, like any heavily armed hoplite, wore a round shield, helmet, armor on his chest, and greaves. For some reason, the movie decided to leave the Spartan's torso exposed, but of course this is silly. In reality, it's not safe. But there were light Spartan infantrymen. Spear, bow, darts. These guys fought with everything. From the age of 7, they were trained to wield any weapon. The design of the Spartan army was unique, and some details are successfully stolen by modern armies to this day. The clear line formation, strict discipline, and incredible physical strength made the Spartan army invincible. Lined up 8 rows deep, the phalanx could stretch for 1 mile, and until 371 BC, it was thought that it was physically impossible to defeat such a formation. The reason was simple. Unlike other armies, the Spartans had no engineering facilities. They simply charged forward, relying on brute force. And in it, they outnumbered and crushed any enemy. Back to Basil, the year 480 BC, and the war with the unwashed Persians is in full swing. Sparta is ruled by King Leonidas, who, like everyone else around him, is a great warrior. Everyone is familiar with the movie 300 Spartans, and we will not repeat the obvious things, but just focus on the differences between the movie and reality. Let's assume that among the 300 will be our Basil. Along with King Leonidas, who actually fought on the front lines with the warriors, Basil holds the defense against the Persian army in the Gorge of Thermopylae. This makes sense because at the beginning of the video, we showed a map showing the size of the two states. According to various calculations, at Thermopylae there were up to 250,000 Persians, and they were only opposed by 7,000 Greek warriors. It is worth noting that the number of Spartans is not accidental. The 300 men were the king's personal guard and the finest warriors, and they really held for 2 long days 20 times their superior enemy. They would have held out longer had it not been for Ephialtes, a local resident, who decided to make some extra money. Ephialtes told the Persians about a mountain path that could be used to bypass the Greek positions. True, the Spartan scouts had not slept, and Leonidas was the first to know about it. The king immediately sent his whole army home, leaving with him only 300 hoplite guards. But this is not romance, it is common sense. There was no worse sin in Sparta than retreating from the battlefield without a clear order. Since Leonidas was king, There was no one to wait for in command, and in order not to become an outcast whose name is covered with shame, Leonidas stayed on his own, and our Basil also chose a similar fate. The film forgot only one detail. Together with the Spartans, there were voluntarily left also other Greeks, in particular 700 inhabitants of Thespia and 400 guys from Thebes. Yes, and next to the Spartans were the Helots, whom we spoke of earlier. The number of slaves is not specified, but the fact that in the campaigns they made a semblance of light infantry is officially confirmed. So there were not 300, but about 1,500 men against Xerxes. But even this does not cancel the fact of a mad feat, because these crumbs have put down about 5,000 Persians, and not simple, but including immortal, the guards of the Persian army. In total, 4,000 Greeks were killed in 3 days, and the Persian losses were more than 5 times that number. Largely due to the psychological factor, in the future the Greeks would win the war and make a very favorable peace. Don't be sad for our Basil. As you may have learned, his life was not the easiest. And to die in battle for a Spartan was the highest honor. For example, one of the 300 Spartans, Aristodemus, was ill at the time of the battle. Leonidas sent him to the countryside for treatment, and after the king and the guards were slaughtered, Aristodemus returned to Sparta. There he was given the nickname Aristodemos the Coward, and even the lad's later exploits had no effect on his position in society. A year later, during the 479th year BC, another Spartan, Pausanias, led the Greek army in the final battle against the Persians. It took place near the town of Plataea and was marked by the total defeat of the Persians. And this despite the fact that they were 3 times more numerous. Aristodemus, a member of the original 300 Spartans, became the hero of the battle. But even that didn't change the attitude toward him one bit. In conclusion, another fun fact to note. If the Spartan boys from childhood were grounded for war, then the girls were grounded for childbirth. Their life was much simpler. Girls were taught to write, to play sports, and were carefully monitored for their health. In a sense, Sparta could be considered the progenitor of feminism, for even the Spartan women handled weapons with flying colors. For a second, this was a couple of 1,000 years ago. And only 100 years ago, in some countries, women didn't even know how to vote. This demonstrates that progress is relative. But no matter how harsh the lives of the Spartans were, they had their place in history permanently secured. That's it for now. And if transformation into a Spartan was to your liking, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. And also suggest your warriors for future releases in the comments. See you soon, friends.